All right, everyone, we have reached our last stop of the day in our discussion on gathering research in developmental science. So we're going to end by talking about interpreting our results, correlation versus causation. I want to make sure we know the difference between these two things. So causation is one event or factor depends on the occurrence of a prior event or factor. In other words, one thing causes another. That's what causation is. Correlation, on the other end, is differences in one factor are associated with differences in another factor. So it's looking at relationships and patterns in data, but it doesn't always indicate causation. It doesn't mean that something caused another. So that's a really important differentiation to have. And we'll see this come up a lot in research. So for example, this headline here, soda drinking is tied to kids' behavior problems. So this is a 2013 study, and kids' behavior problems is defined as things like aggression, withdrawal, and attention problems. Right away, many people might jump to conclusions when they see this. They conclude that soda causes behavior problems when they see this, but does it really? We always want to question the research that we're seeing. Are there other ways that we can interpret this finding? So maybe we can ask, does soda cause behavior problems? Maybe it does. That's one way we could look at it. We also want to consider some other things. So do existing behavior problems lead to more soda consumption? So kind of looking at it the other way. That's one fault that we'll see, is trying to determine the direction of causation. That can be another, not fault, but difficulty in research. Another thing is this just a correlation with other factors that are not considered? For example, parenting practices. So maybe parents are passive and uninvolved in the child's life. And so as a result of that, soda intake is unmonitored because they're not involved, right? And then another thing could be that the behavior problems are stemming from uninvolved parenting practices that are occurring. So the soda intake and the behavior problems are both a result of the uninvolved parenting style, but they aren't actually related to each other. So that could be a potential way to interpret this. We don't know. Parent education, socioeconomic status, there's a ton of confounding factors that could be in the picture that aren't considered in the research. Also, like I said, wrong direction. We could be looking at it in the wrong direction. Maybe soda doesn't cause behavior problems, but behavior problems lead to more soda consumption, like I said. So maybe it's a coping strategy for their behavior problems. I don't know. So there's a lot of ways to look at research. It can be very complicated stuff, and it can be very hard to prove causation, especially in developmental research. So we'll often find associations or correlations and go from there, and then continue refining research until we get closer and closer to solid answers. And the bottom line is that we have to always look at research with a critical eye, right? And avoid jumping to conclusions and freaking out when we see maybe headlines like this. So just wanted to kind of teach you all to be a little more seasoned in how we approach research. This is just an introduction to research, but get us on the right track for this semester. Lastly, we're going to talk about ethical standards. So we have to always remain ethical in research, right? Until fairly recently, decisions used to be left entirely to the judgment of individual scientists, and this led to ethically abusive studies. One famous example is the Tuskegee study. So it's the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. That was the name of the study, and it was 400 African-American men, and they were not told that they tested positive for syphilis. And they were not told that they were being included in a research project investigating its effects if it was left untreated. I'm sure we can already see how that's so problematic and just terrible. And the results of this were terrible. More than 100 of them died as a result. It's ridiculously unethical and wrong. So, this is just a horrid example of really unethical research. One, they didn't even know they were in the study and they were not told that they tested positive. There's layers of wrong in that, right? But nowadays, we have standards in place to kind of regulate our ethics in research. So there's ethical guidelines based on these fundamental concerns. One, freedom from harm. So we have to ensure that participants will not be physically or psychologically harmed. Second, informed consent. They must voluntarily agree to be in the study, and they also have to be given reasonable understanding of the study. So they can't be forced, coerced, or even given inappropriate incentives. Informed consent can be hazy for children, usually requires consent from parents or child advocates. That's how they consent to studies. But yes, that is the second one. The second fundamental concern in ethical standards is informed consent. And confidentiality. So personal information must remain confidential, not to be made available to embarrass or even harm the participant. It's important that they maintain confidentiality. In any research study you've seen, you'll often see like fake names given to the participants to make it easy to follow, but you're not actually putting them at risk by disclosing their real name, right? So that is ethical standards in research, and that actually ends our day on research methods in developmental science. So thank you for joining, everyone, and I will see you next time we meet. Take care.